Hey guys, Radio Guy here. We're going to do a tutorial today on programming the TYT radio. The model is MD-2017. It's a dual band DMR and analog handheld radio. Take a look at my other video I did where it's unboxing and walkthrough, and right now we're going to work on programming. I want to show you the basics on how to program this thing. The first thing you need to do is install the cable driver available from the website, the TYT download website. And the first thing you want to do is you want to go up, after you get the cable driver installed, go to settings, program, and read data. You want to read the data from the radio and make sure it's connecting all right. Read data from radio, click OK. All right, read it OK. It says success, click OK. So this screen right here is basic information. It tells you the frequencies that your radio can receive. And I usually close that, it's not necessary. General settings. This has some things that you may want to look at. I don't like it when the radio beeps when I press buttons. I like a quiet radio. So right here where it says disable all tone, I always check that. If you like to hear the tones beep when you press the buttons, then you wouldn't want to do that. But let's see, scan. If you want to password protect your radio, maybe you're doing this for survival or some other reason, and if you're working in a team and your teammate gets shot and he's dying, he can reach down and turn off his radio, and then that way the enemy or the person that finds his radio cannot use his radio without the password. Right here is a power on password. So if you're dying and for operational security, you turn off your radio. That way nobody else can use it. This is a good feature to have. You don't have to enable it, but it's there. The voice announcement, this drives me crazy. Every time you change channel, it's not going to read out the alpha name that you put in the radio, like John's repeater. What it's going to do is it's going to say channel 1, channel 3, channel 4. I don't like that, so I'm unchecking the channel announcement. Radio name, I'm just going to type in Radio Guy. And the radio ID, I believe this is for the digital side of the radio. Not everyone uses digital, but I go by 19, so I'm going to put 19 in the radio ID. Vox setting. People that don't know what Vox is, it's hands-free transmission. So if you have a headset and every time you start talking, the Vox sensitivity will pick up your voice and your radio will key up all by itself. That can be hard to use in a noisy environment. But if, say, you're hang gliding and you want to have radio communications, you may not want to let go of your hang glider to talk on the radio. So a Vox would be a good option for you. We're going to skip over some of this stuff. Backlight timer. Do you want your backlight on your radio to stay on all the time and run down your battery? Or I usually do 15 seconds. So every time you move your volume knob, change channels, the backlight will turn on for 15 seconds, then it will go off again. Let's see. Right here where it says frequency channel mode, this means that do you want it to display the frequency that's in the radio, or do you want to name your channels like John's repeater or Bay repeater 1 or whatever you want to call your repeaters? I like to go by the alpha name, so I'm going to put channel in there, and that way I'm not looking at frequencies. I'm looking at names that I designate to put in the channels. The time zone, this radio has does military time. You can, if your UTC is universal time clock, you can You need for your area that you're in. You'll need to find out if it's plus or minus in the number that goes in there. I tend to ignore that. And okay, right up here in the upper right hand corner where it says radio ID, this is where the digital ID goes in. So I'm going to do 19 because my digital radio is 19. If you're a ham radio operator and you're part of Brindmaster, then you're going to want to find out what your Brindmaster number is or your DMR digital ID. If you're using GMRS or just for survival purposes, you will need to come up with your own scheme for numbers. As you can see, you can fit in a lot of numbers in there. So you can make up whatever you want and put it in there, and that way it allows your radio to operate in digital communications, which is more secure. And each radio will need a unique ID, and we'll get into that later of why that's important. All right, so that's general settings. Menu items. When you go into the menu on your radio, you have an option of what shows up in the menu. If you're doing commercial type radios, you're not going to want your users to be able to change a lot of the settings. You can uncheck these things, and that way your users don't have access to those settings. But if you're like me and you're a hobbyist or a survivalist, prepper, you can go through and leave all these checked if you choose to do so. All right, button options. Commercial radios are a little different than ham radios. Commercial radios, you can tell the radio what the buttons will do on the side of the radio, and this is kind of cool. I like doing this. So the top button is the orange button on top of this radio. What I set this to was to switch frequencies, not frequencies. When you're looking at the front of your radio, you're looking at an upper frequency and a lower frequency, and there's a little indicator there, and the indicator tells you which channel you're talking on. So if you tap the orange button, I set it up so it moves the indicator to the opposite channel. That way you can change channels. You can change which one you're talking on without pulling your radio out of the holder because it's the button on the very top. Switch up and down on screen. I believe that's the right one. The top button long press, I have what's called talk around. And talk around means that you're going to stay on the repeater channel. If you're using repeaters, this is what talk around is for. You're staying on the repeater channel, but you're no longer going through the repeater. You're going directly to the other radios. Maybe you're carpooling and you're monitoring the repeater channel, but you're just talking to the other cars in your carpool and you don't want to use the repeater that's going to go over hundreds of miles. You just want to talk to the other cars. You can turn on the talk around feature and can do it that way. Side button 1 is the one right above the push to talk. It's blue, and I set this one on mine to scan. It's a feature I like. It's easy to get to. You just press it and it starts scanning. Side button 2 is an up arrow, and I set mine, I think it's to left, to toggle left and right. And what that does is it changes channels in your zone. Okay, so up will be left, and the side button 3 will be down or right. Right key. So on the side of the radio, underneath the push to talk, there's a left key and a right key, or it's an up and down. But what that's going to do is when you're in your zone, you can toggle through different channels. And I think that's all we're going to set up for now. Those are the main functions that I wanted to get into. Oh, I'm sorry, P1 and P2. Let's do those two. P1 and P2 are above the menu button and the back button on the front of the radio. And what I set mine to is zone up and zone down. So if you don't have zone button set up, you're going to have a hard time changing zones. And we'll talk about zones and what zones are in just a minute. So P2 will be zone down. Zone plus and zone negative is what they call it on here. All right. So there's other features you can do. You can do preset text messages for when you're on digital mode. We're not going to get into that on this video. So we're going to close the button icon. Text messages. This is where you set up pre-made text messages. That way you don't have to hammer them out. The old original cell phones or Blackberries, where you had to sit there and hammer out every little letter on a text message by holding down 1 3 times to get an A or B, and then tap 3, the number 3 4 or 5 times to get D, E, or F. It takes a while to type all that out. If you make your own pre-made text messages, those can be in the radio where you just select the pre-made message. We could do one as a sample here. So our first text message, pre-made, will say, "What time will you be home?" That's an easy one, right? Or we could say, my ETA is 30 minutes. That's easy, right? So you can keep adding these. You can have a 30-minute ETA, 1-hour ETA, 45-minute ETA. You can do as many of these text messages as you want, and they will be in your radio and ready to send to anybody at any time. Privacy settings. You are allowed to encrypt if you're in digital mode. I like this. It's not like the old family radio service, the FRS radios. These radios allow you to totally encrypt your signal. We probably won't get into the legality of encryption, but you are able to encrypt your radio. You can have some channels in your radio set up for non-encryption, and then you can have other ones set up for encryption. So if we get in a bad situation, if it's red dawn, if you're in a situation where you need to protect your family, you can set up your radios, tell everybody, go to the TAC channel. We call it a TAC channel because it's encrypted. So in this, just for prosperity's sake, what we're going to do is we're going to do our encryption key is 6543. Okay. And that'll be our encryption number 1. If we wanted to do a separate encryption code, we can do 9854. I'm just making these up. They can be whatever you choose. And only the other people with your encryption key are going to be able to hear your voice going across the radios. Everybody else will just hear scrambled gobbledygook. Okay, so right now we're in digital contacts. This is important, especially if you're wanting to do digital DMR, digital communications or encrypted communications. You're going to need to set up a group call. And what this does is it designates in the channel, when you transmit out, it's going to go to a group of radios. And for the radios to hear your call that you're putting out, you have to make it a group call. You also have to come up with a call ID for that group, and each radio will need to be programmed like that. What I'm going to do, you can give it a friendly name, I call it. It has nothing to do with the programming. We can call it John's doesn't take that long. John's block. Maybe John's on a street and it's a neighborhood watch and everybody on the street has a radio. So that group would be John's block. If you have a Sally's block, you can create another one for Sally's block, and they all can share the same frequency, but only the ones on John's block will key up when John's block people key up. Sally and John's, the radios are not going to hear each other's message. The call type is going to be a group call, and the caller ID, you can make up a number, 896321. Let's do that. And we're not going to use a tone. And just like we described, we can do another group, right, that says Sally's block. And it'll be a group call. And the number will need to be different from the first one. We can type in whatever we want there. It could be as long or short as we want. And now you have two separate groups. This is another area where it's important This is also going to double as your caller ID list. So in the beginning of the video, we added myself in as radio ID number 1. But what we're going to do is we're going to add myself here too. So when I call other radios, if I'm in the call, if I'm in this log, then they'll have my name show up. So we'll put radio guy. All right. And because I'm not a group like the neighborhood watch block party, I'm an individual. So instead of a group call, this is where we're going to change this to a private call, because I'm a private radio. And my number that I put in for myself was 19 in the first part of the video. So we want to match that here. We're going to add a second person. We'll put Hammerhead. Hammerhead. All right. And he is not a group of radios talking to each other. He is an individual radio. So we're going to switch this to private call. And his ID we'll do as 15. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how to set up digital contacts. You're going to need your group calls and your private calls. All the individual radios in your party are all going to have to be listed in here. They don't have to be, but if you want the caller IDs to work properly on the radio, then they're going to need to be in there. All right, let's close this out. That's digital contacts. Digital RX group call, we're going to skip that. Zone information. We talked about zones a little bit earlier in some of the settings. A zone is a way for you to organize your frequencies. You can have, let me open up zones here. So we can have a zone, right? And we'll call it ham radio. And then all of our ham radio channels can go in the ham radio zone. And we can add a second zone, and we can call it the GMRS zone. If you're using general mobile radio service, those frequencies can go there. And we can add another one. We can call it survival. How about that? All right, so now we have 3 zones to work with. And we'll come back to these later, but we can't use this just yet. We need to create, we're going to need to create some channels to put into our zones. And it's just a way for you to organize your frequencies in a way that you can use them. Scan list, if you like to scan channels, you just need to create a scan list. We'll go through that, but there's nothing that we can add to the scan list until we create channels. All right, channel 1. The first channel we'll do is an analog channel. Analog, and we're going to set the bandwidth. The bandwidth means how wide of the frequency range are we going to use when we're sending a transmission. The narrower or the smaller the bandwidth, the poorer the audio quality is going to be. In analog mode, the standard is the 25 kilohertz. That's the last one, the 25. That'll give you the richest, fullest sound in your radio communication. And scan list, if we have a scan list, we can set it. I'm going to put scan list 1. Squelch. This is kind of tricky. If you're in a city, you're going to have a lot more radio traffic than if you're in the country. The higher your squelch is, the harder it will be to receive weak signals. But if you're in a noisy environment, you don't want your radio to keep having all this interference coming in. So I like to use 1, possibly 2. I don't usually get it past 2. The next thing we need to do is the power setting right here where it says power. It's on high, and that's fine. I'm going to leave it there. Right up here, the next line is the alpha name. So this is the friendly name that's going to show up on the front of your radio. So for this one, let's do, we'll just call it the home base channel. We're going to use this around our house, on our property, and the RX frequency. Let's just do 462.725. That's a GMRS frequency. It's a repeater frequency, but that's okay. We'll use it for this demonstration. So this is receive, and if you're just doing radio to radio, if you're not using a repeater, the receive and transmit are going to be on the same frequency, 462.725. And everything else here will be fine. Now, when you turn into this frequency, the way we have it set up right now, you're going to hear all the traffic. In my area, you're going to hear a car wash, you're going to hear a grocery store, or a discount store called DD's Discount. You're going to hear all kinds of stuff on this frequency. There's a lot of businesses improperly using these channels, which should be open for the public use, not business use. There is business class radios, and they're licensed, but businesses are being cheap and don't want to do licensing, so you're going to hear a lot of interference. If you don't want to hear the other people on your channel, right down here where it says analog data, CT, CSS, DCS, you're able to set up a code. And what this code does is it blocks out all that extra traffic that you don't want to hear. And the first set is called PL tones, and you're going to have from 67, here's 91.5. These are called PL tones, and only radios with these PL tones are going to be able to come through where you hear them. If those radios don't have your PL tone in their carrier, in their signal, your radio won't key and you won't hear them. I don't like PL as much as I like what's called digital coded squelch. So we're going to use DCS. If you scroll past all the PL tones, the 254.1 is the last PL tone, then we're in the DCS codes. Another reason I like to use DCS codes is because the little Walmart radios, the family radios from Walmart, they don't have DCS. So you're not going to hear the kids talking about lollipops and baby monitors, things like that. If you go down past the PL tones to the DCS codes, then it clears up a lot of the interference issues. So let's try D125N for the decode. That means decode. And then the ENC over here means encode. When you're talking radio to radio without the use of a repeater, just one handheld radio to another, your decode and the encode need to be the exact same number. So we need to find D125N. We went past the PL tones, and there is D125N. Perfect. So we have created our first channel, and over to the left where you see channel, see how it says home base already? There's nowhere that you need to hit click. There's nowhere you need to click to save or keep the settings. Once you close this, it's going to work. And okay, so we're going to close it. Now we're going to do one more channel. Let's see, this is our home base channel. See, this is home base. So I'm going to click add down here at the bottom, and this is going to give us a second channel. This time we're going to do digital. And so we're going to change this to digital. The bandwidth for digital is not 25. It only gives you one option, and that's 12.5. It's a narrower band, but it's going to be digital, and you can set it up secure if you'd like. The scan list, we can still include it in our same scan list. Squelch, leave that at 1. And then we're going to have high power. The channel name, since it's digital, let's go ahead and make it a TAC channel. How about that? TAC 1. We can use a different frequency. Let's do 462.6000. That's another GMRS repeater frequency, but we're going to use that for the sake of this demonstration. And we're not using a repeater, so it's just radio to radio. So the receive, the RX frequency, and the TX transmit frequency are going to be this exact same frequency. I do like to click talk around on these channels. I always do that. Okay. Over on the right hand side, we're going to fill out some information that wasn't available on the analog channel, because the right hand side is strictly for digital. All right, so contact name. So contact name, what we're going to do is let's do John's Block Party. All right, that's going to be our talk group. So our John's Block Party on all the other radios will need to be put on there. Group list, we're going to leave that alone. Color code, we're just going to use one. There's lots of color codes. So you can have different channels all sharing the same frequency, and if the color codes are different, they won't interfere with each other. You're not going to hear the cross traffic. We could use the same frequency for, remember we had a Sally's channel, right? And we can just leave the frequency the same and change the color code, and that way they can be on the same frequency and they don't hear each other. So we're going to use slot 1. Privacy. Privacy is where you would use the encryption we talked about earlier. We called this attack channel, so let's go ahead and enable encryption. We're going to use basic encryption. All right, and then we're just going to use that first encryption code that we put in back on the page a few minutes ago. So this channel is done. If you flash this into different radios, the only thing you would need to do is change the digital ID on the other menu settings. But all these channels, well, you can flash all these channels to every single radio and they'll work together. We're going to add one more channel. It'll be a digital channel again. And we're just going to change a few of the settings. Oh, I do want to show you this. Over on the left-hand side in the tree under channel information, you can go to the channel we just did, the TAC channel. You can right-click, copy, right-click again, and hit paste. So all the information that we put on the first channel, the TAC1 channel, is now, look at that, it's all in there, 462-6000, 462-6000. It doesn't transfer the name over, so we're going to do TAC2. And let's do TAC2 as Sally's Block Party. So we're going to go over to the right-hand side. We're sharing the same frequency. We're going to do Sally's Block. So these two things, these two groups will be same channel, same frequency, different name. And we can change the color code to 3. That way they don't interfere with each other. And the repeater slot, we can also change that if you want to use 2. All these things will help from the radios interfering with each other. All right, I think we're done with channels. After you've created your channels, this is back to the scan list. Let me close this down and the zones. So over on the left-hand side, where it says zone information, let's go to survival. This is one of our zones. And on your radio, you're going to have an upper frequency and a lower frequency. So channel member A is the upper one, and channel member B is the lower one. What you can do is you can do home base. We're going to add that. We're going to add TAC1 and TAC2. On the lower frequency, I want you to have the ability to do home base, TAC1, and TAC2. So now you're going to have all 3 channels. If you want to, we can remove, right, the home base from these, and it sends it back over to the left-hand side. So right now we're in our survival zone. Let's go to our GMRS zone. Maybe in the GMRS zone, that's where we want our home base to be. So let's put our home base over there. All right, we're organizing our channels. Then we go to scan list 1. We can click on the frequencies that we added, TAC1 and TAC2. You can add those, send them over to the right side. Now they'll be in your scan list. So when you press the blue button above your push to talk, When you tap that, it'll start scanning all 3 of these channels at the same time. All right, well, that gives you a basic function of how to program these radios. If you're doing repeaters, it's going to be a little different, but hopefully this gives you an idea and it shows you how to set up your radio for however you choose to use it. The last thing you do is you're going to want to program your radio. You go to program, you're going to write the data, and you click OK. And it's going to take all that information that you just put down and you're going to send it over to the radio. It takes a little while. When you read a radio, it reads pretty quickly, but when you go to send a radio, send the information to the radio, it takes a while. When you're new at programming, you're going to have to send the information 3 or 4 times. There's going to be things you want to change. Maybe the names you put in for the channels are too long and they don't show up on the screen correctly. Maybe you forgot to disable the beeping when you press buttons and the beeping is driving you crazy. You have to fine tune it for your purposes. Be sure to check out my other video where I go through the basic function of the radio, the unboxing, and how to lock the keys on the radio, how to unlock the keys on the radio. You really need to learn these features because if you're bumping into things and changing channels accidentally, it's not going to be a fun experience for you to use a radio. You're going to wimp out, you're going to pull out your cell phone and go, this is so much easier just to use a cell phone. But in the event that you need a radio, you're not going to know how to use it because you haven't been using it this whole time. It's good to have practice and good to learn survival skills. All right, it read correctly. I want to go back to one other setting here. So you could flash this program into multiple radios. What I wanted to go back and cover again, when you redo your radio, you're going to want to change right here where it says radio name. You want to change that. And right here, I claimed myself as radio guy and my ID is 19. The next radio that I put in there, I might want to put 15 for the next user, and the user after that would be 13. And that way, when you flash the radio, everybody has a unique caller ID. So it's important to remember to do that. All right, guys, thanks for joining me for today's tutorial. I hope you like it. Subscribe and tune in for more educational videos on radios, survival, and skills that you can learn to help you when times get tough. We'll put it that way. All right, guys, Radio Guy signing out. 73.